Officer Kyle Braden had been wearing the badge of the Metro Police Department for just under 4 years when he made the decision that would cost the taxpayers of his city $4.8 million and end his career in disgrace. He was 28 years old, fit aggressive, and possessed a deeply inflated sense of his own intuition. He was a product of a specific type of policing culture, one that prioritized statistics over service and viewed every civilian interaction as a potential combat scenario. He walked with his chest out and his thumbs hooked in his vest, the kind of officer who believed that respect was something you demanded at volume, not something you earned through temperament. On this particular Tuesday morning, Braden was patrolling the perimeter of Oak Creek Heights, an affluent enclave of manicured lawns and seven-figure homes looking for trouble where there wasn't any. In the world of law enforcement, there is a concept known as the reasonable officer standard, what a well-trained, objective officer would do in a given situation. But Braden wasn't reasonable. He was hungry for action. His personnel file was already thick with use of force reports, all of which had been cleared by internal affairs as within policy, though veteran sergeants whispered that Braden was a lawsuit waiting to happen. He had a reputation for turning traffic stops into interrogations and jaywalking tickets into resisting arrest charges. He believed he was a wolf guarding the sheep, but in reality he was a liability guarding a liability. And on this bright, sun-drenched morning in May, he was about to run headfirst into a force of nature he was completely ill-equipped to handle. Sitting in a parked, unmarked black Ford Explorer on the corner of Elm and Sycamore was Commander Marcus Thorne. At 54 years old, Thorne was a monolith of a man with broad shoulders that filled out his suit jacket and a shaved head that gleamed in the morning light. He had spent 25 years on the job. He had started walking a beat in the housing projects during the crack epidemic of the 90s, worked narcotics for a decade, commanded the homicide division, and now he held one of the most critical positions in the state. He was the commander of training standards and professional development. Every cadet who entered the academy and every officer who went through in-service training operated under the curriculum Marcus Thorne wrote. He was the architect of the department's ethics. Thorne was parked legally on the side of the road answering emails on his Toughbook laptop before heading into a meeting with the mayor's public safety liaison who lived 2 blocks away. He was reviewing a new module on de-escalation tactics and implicit bias. He had his window cracked open to let in the spring breeze, a cup of lukewarm coffee in the cup holder, and his badge clipped to his belt, though it was obscured by his steering wheel. He was in his element, calm, professional, and entirely within his rights. He had no idea that a few streets away an officer he had never met was scanning the neighborhood like a hunter, or that a resident behind a curtain was about to initiate a sequence of events that would expose the rot in the department Thorne loved. Before we dive deeper into this collision of careers, I want to ask, where are you listening from today? If you believe that experience and integrity should matter more than aggression in policing, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We are building a community dedicated to truth and accountability, and we need you with us. The catalyst for the disaster was Martha Gable. Martha was 62 years old, the treasurer of the Oak Creek Heights Homeowners Association, and a woman who prided herself on knowing the make and model of every car that belonged in her neighborhood. She lived on the corner of Elm in a colonial revival with white pillars. At 10:15 a.m., she looked out her bay window and saw the black SUV. It was clean, it was new, but the man inside didn't fit her mental database of neighbors. He was a large black man sitting alone typing on a computer. In Martha's mind, which had been fed a steady diet of fear-mongering cable news and neighborhood watch email alerts, unfamiliar equaled dangerous. She watched him for 6 minutes. He didn't get out. He didn't case a house. He just typed. But for Martha, the mere presence of a black man idling in a car in her neighborhood was cause for alarm. She picked up her phone and dialed the non-emergency line, a number she had memorized. When the dispatcher answered, Martha didn't report a man working on a laptop. She reported a suspicious vehicle with a driver who was staking out properties. He's been there for 20 minutes. Martha lied, tripling the actual time. He's watching the Anderson house across the street. I think he might be preparing to break in. We've had package thefts lately, and he doesn't look like he belongs here. The dispatcher, following protocol, logged the call. Is he aggressive? Is he out of the vehicle? No, he's just sitting there, menacingly. Martha said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Please send someone quickly before he does something. The call went out over the radio. Unit for a suspicious vehicle corner of Elm and Sycamore. Black Ford Explorer. Subject described as a male, possibly casing residences. Officer Kyle Braden was 3 streets over. He heard the call and his eyes lit up. This was it. A proactive stop. A chance to catch a burglar before the crime. He grabbed the radio mic. 3 Alpha 20, show me en route. I'm close. He didn't wait for backup. He didn't check the license plate of the vehicle in the system, which would have immediately flagged it as a department-registered vehicle assigned to the command staff. He just hit the gas. In his mind, he had already convicted the driver. He wasn't going to investigate. He was going to apprehend. Braden turned the corner onto Elm Street with a burst of speed, his engine roaring unnecessarily in the quiet suburb. He spotted the black Explorer instantly. It was parked perfectly parallel to the curb, not blocking any driveways or hydrants. A seasoned officer might have noticed the tint-grade legal but government standard or the municipal exempt plates. Braden saw neither. He saw a target. He pulled his patrol car up behind the Explorer, initiating a crooked park maneuver, angling his nose toward the street to provide cover, a tactical positioning used for high-risk felony stops. He didn't hit the siren, but he flipped on his overhead lights, the red and blue LEDs exploding against the serene backdrop of oak trees and manicured hedges. Inside the Explorer, Commander Thorne sighed. He saw the lights in his rearview mirror. He checked his watch. He had 10 minutes before his meeting. He assumed the officer was running plates or perhaps responding to a call nearby. Thorne didn't move. He kept his hands visible on the steering wheel, a habit ingrained from decades of survival on the streets, and the unfortunate reality of being a black man in America, regardless of the rank. Braden exited his vehicle. He didn't adjust his hat or check his surroundings. He dropped his hand immediately to his holster, unsnapping the retention hood of his service weapon. He didn't draw it, but the threat was implicit. He adopted a bladed stance, walking aggressively toward the driver's side of the Explorer. He didn't approach with the caution of an inquiry. He approached with the hostility of an assault. Thorne watched the officer in the side mirror. He noted the hand on the gun. He noted the lack of cover. He noted the aggressive pace. Sloppy, Thorne thought. Dangerous and sloppy. Braden reached the window. He didn't knock. He slapped the glass with the palm of his hand. Thorne, maintaining a calm that would have unsettled a smarter man, lowered the window. He didn't turn his head quickly. He moved with deliberate slowness. "Driver, let me see your hands." Braden barked, his voice cracking slightly with adrenaline. Thorne kept his hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel. He turned his head slowly to face the young officer. "My hands are right here, officer. I am not moving." "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Braden demanded, leaning in, invading the space of the vehicle. "We've got calls about you watching houses." Thorne looked at Braden. He saw the nameplate. K. Braden. He memorized it instantly. "Officer Braden." Thorne set his voice a deep, resonant baritone that commanded courtrooms and lecture halls. "I am parked legally on a public street. I am reviewing case files. I have no business with any residents here." "I didn't ask you for a story," Braden snapped. "I asked what you're doing. You don't live here. We have a zero-tolerance policy for loitering and casing in this sector." "I am not loitering," Thorne replied, his patience holding by a thread. "And casing implies intent to commit a crime. Unless you have reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime, this is a consensual encounter and I am free to go. However, out of professional courtesy, I will inform you that I am waiting for a meeting. The use of the legal phrase, reasonable, articulable suspicion, should have been a bucket of ice water on Braden's head. It was the language of the law, the language of the academy. Civilians didn't talk like that. But Braden didn't hear a colleague. He heard a jailhouse lawyer, a suspect who knew just enough of the legal code to be annoying. "Don't quote the law to me," Braden sneered. "I know the law. You're making people nervous. And when people get nervous, I get involved. Now I want to see some ID. Right now." This is the moment where bias turns fatal. Officer Braden had ignored the visual cues of the car, the demeanor of the driver, and the specific vocabulary being used. He had decided the narrative before he opened his car door: black male, out-of-place potential burglar. Anything that contradicted that script was rejected by his brain. Do you think officers should be required to pass a legal terminology test before being allowed on patrol? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thorne shifted slightly. "Officer Braden, I am going to reach into my jacket pocket to retrieve my credentials. I am informing you of my movements before I make them." "Just get the ID," Braden said, impatient, his hand tightening on his grip. Thorne moved his right hand slowly to his inner blazer pocket. He pulled out a black leather bifold. It wasn't a standard wallet. It was a badge case. He flipped it open. The gold shield of a commander a rank 4 levels above Braden gleamed in the sun. Beside it was the department ID card identifying him as Marcus Thorne, Commander of Training. Thorne held it out the window. "I am Commander Marcus Thorne. I am on the job. Check the ID." Braden glanced at it for a fraction of a second. He didn't read the text. He didn't study the rank. He saw a badge and assumed it was fake. He'd heard stories of boosters using fake badges to confuse rookies. His ego refused to accept that the man he was treating like a criminal was actually his superior. "Anyone can buy a badge online," Braden said, waving it away. "That doesn't prove anything. Step out of the car." Thorne stared at him, genuinely stunned. "Officer, look at the holographic seal. Look at the ID number. Call it in to dispatch. Verify before you escalate." "I said step out of the car," Braden yelled, stepping back and putting his hand fully on his gun now. "Failure to comply. Get out now." Thorne knew the procedure. If he refused, Braden would escalate to force. If he resisted physically, he could be shot. The irony was bitter. Thorne had written the very policy Braden was currently violating. He decided to comply to preserve his life and the evidence. "I am complying," Thorne said, loud enough for the dash cam to hear. "I am exiting the vehicle under duress." Thorne unbuckled his seatbelt. He opened the door. As he placed one foot on the pavement, Braden didn't wait. He lunged forward, grabbing Thorne by the wrist and the lapel of his expensive suit. "Get out! Turn around!" Braden shouted, yanking the 54-year-old man from the car. Thorne stumbled but kept his balance. He was 6'2" and weighed 240 pounds. Braden was 5'10". If Thorne had wanted to, he could have dismantled the younger man. But he went limp, following the path of least resistance. Braden spun him around and slammed him against the side of the Explorer. The sound of Thorne's body hitting the metal echoed down the quiet street. "Hands behind your back!" Braden screamed, his adrenaline spiking off the charts. "I am not resisting," Thorne said calmly. His cheek pressed against the warm metal of his own car. "You are violating General Order 402 regarding de-escalation. You have not articulated a crime." Braden didn't listen. He wrenched Thorne's arms behind his back, twisting the shoulders to a painful angle. He pulled his handcuffs from his belt. Click, click. The steel ratcheted tight around Thorne's wrists. Martha Gable was watching from her window, a hand over her mouth. She had wanted the man investigated, but seeing the violence of it, the way the officer handled the well-dressed man, sent a prickle of unease through her. "You're under arrest for obstruction and disorderly conduct," Braden panted, securing the cuffs. He patted Thorne down aggressively, reaching into pockets, pulling out the department phone, the keys, and the wallet Braden had refused to look at. "Officer Braden," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "You have just arrested a ranking officer of your own department without probable cause. You have failed to verify credentials. You have used excessive force on a compliant subject. My badge number is 004. Look at the ID in your hand." Braden paused. The adrenaline was fading just enough for his brain to process the words. Badge 004. That was a single-digit badge. That meant command staff. The chief was 001. Braden looked down at the wallet he had tossed onto the hood of the car. The sun glared off the gold badge. He saw the eagle. He saw the rockers. Commander. He looked at the ID card. The face staring back was the man he had just slammed into a car. A cold pit opened in Braden's stomach. A silence descended on the street, broken only by the chirping of birds and the squawk of Braden's radio. "Dispatch to 3 Alpha 20, check the status." The radio crackled. Before Braden could answer, another vehicle turned the corner. A patrol sergeant's SUV. It was Sergeant Mike Reynolds, a 50-year-old veteran who had heard the radio traffic and the escalating tone in Braden's voice. Reynolds was the shift supervisor, a man who just wanted to make it to retirement without a heart attack. Reynolds pulled up, seeing the scene Braden standing behind a large black man in a suit handcuffed against a car. Reynolds put his car in park and stepped out, adjusting his belt. "Braden, what do we have?" Reynolds called out, walking over. Dispatch said suspicious vehicle. Yes, Sarge." Braden stammered, his face losing color. "Subject refused to ID, was acting aggressive. I detained him for investigation." Reynolds got closer. He looked at the man in cuffs. He saw the profile. He saw the shaved head. He saw the specific cut of the suit. Reynolds stopped walking. His heart hammered a double beat. He knew that man. He had sat in that man's classroom 3 months ago for a mandatory ethics seminar. "Oh my God," Reynolds whispered. Thorne turned his head as far as he could. "Hello, Sergeant Reynolds. I believe Officer Braden here needs a refresher on the Fourth Amendment." Reynolds's face went white. He looked at Braden with a mix of fury and pity. "Braden," Reynolds said, his voice trembling. "Do you know who this is? He said he was a commander, but—" "Uncuff him," Reynolds barked. It wasn't a request. It was a guttural order. "Uncuff him right now. Sarge, he was resisting. Uncuff him, you idiot." Reynolds screamed, sprinting the last few steps to grab Braden's shoulder and shove him back. Reynolds reached for his own key, his hands shaking. "Commander Thorne, sir, I am so sorry. I don't know what. I just got here." "It's fine, Mike," Thorne said, his voice steady. "Let the officer do it. He put them on. He can take them off." Braden stood frozen. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him like a collapsing building. He stepped forward, his fingers fumbling with the key. It took him 3 tries to find the keyhole. Click. The cuffs loosened. Thorne pulled his arms free. He didn't rub his wrists immediately. He didn't lash out. He slowly adjusted his suit jacket. He straightened his tie. Then he turned to face Braden. Thorne didn't look like a suspect anymore. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who could end a career with a phone call. "Stand at attention, officer," Thorne said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command spoken with the weight of 25 years of authority. Braden's heels clicked together instinctively. He stood straight, sweat rolling down his temple. "Give me your logic," Thorne said, stepping into Braden's personal space. "Walk me through your probable cause. You saw a parked car. Then what? I received a call, sir. Suspicious vehicle. Is sitting in a vehicle a crime? No, sir. Did you observe any criminal act upon arrival? No, sir. Did you run my plate? No, sir. Why? Braden swallowed hard. I wanted to secure the scene. You wanted a stat, Thorne corrected him. You wanted a felony stop. You saw a black man in a nice neighborhood and you decided the law didn't apply to you. You violated 3 separate general orders in under 4 minutes. You failed to de-escalate. You failed to verify identification. And you laid hands on a superior officer who was complying with your unlawful commands. Thorne pointed to the dash cam on Braden's car. That camera is running correct. Yes, sir. Good. Because it's going to be the primary evidence in your termination hearing. Reynolds stepped in. Commander, do you want me to take him off the street? Take his badge and his gun, Sergeant, Thorne said, turning back to his car to retrieve his laptop, which had slid off the seat during the scuffle. He is relieved of duty pending an internal investigation. And Mike? Yes, Commander. Call the chief. Tell him I'm going to be late for the meeting, and tell him exactly why. The aftermath was swift, brutal, and public. Officer Kyle Braden was placed on administrative leave that afternoon. The body cam footage was pulled and reviewed by the chief of police within the hour. It was damning. There was no way to spin it. It showed an arrogant, biased officer escalating a non-situation into an arrest of a high-ranking official. But the investigation didn't stop there. Because it was Commander Thorne, the review was exhaustive. They pulled Braden's previous stops. They found a pattern. Over his 4 years, Braden had stopped black drivers at a rate 4 times higher than white drivers in similar neighborhoods. He had a history of failure to verify complaints that had been swept under the rug by lower-level supervisors. Thorne didn't just let the department fire Braden. He sued. He sued not for the money, but to force the discovery process open. He wanted the emails, the text messages, the training logs. The lawsuit exposed a culture in Braden's specific precinct that encouraged aggressive, proactive stops based on hunches rather than evidence. The city settled for $8 million to avoid a federal civil rights trial that would have humiliated the department nationally. But Thorne ensured that the settlement included a clause. The video had to be released for training purposes. Braden was fired and decertified, meaning he could never work as a police officer in the state again. Martha Gable, the woman who called, faced public shaming when the 911 tape was released, though she faced no criminal charges. She moved out of the neighborhood 6 months later. 2 years later, Marcus Thorne stood before the state legislature. He was no longer just a commander. He was the newly appointed deputy chief. He was testifying on a bill to mandate implicit bias training and increase the threshold for reasonable suspicion stops. I was lucky, Thorne told the hushed room of senators. I had a badge, I knew the law, I had a sergeant who recognized me. But if I had been a teacher, a contractor, or just a father waiting to pick up his son, that encounter could have ended with my death. Officer Braden didn't see a citizen with rights. He saw a threat to be neutralized. Until we change the heart of the officer, we cannot change the outcome on the street. He paused, looking directly at the cameras. We cannot train away hate, but we can legislate accountability. And we can ensure that no badge is a shield for bigotry. The room was silent. This story isn't just about one bad apple. It's about the barrel. It's about the systems that let Kyle Braden operate for 4 years before he picked the wrong victim. It serves as a reminder that authority without humility is tyranny, and that true justice requires constant vigilance. What do you think? Should officers be personally liable for civil rights violations, or should the taxpayers foot the bill? And how do we fix a system where a commander can be treated like a criminal just for sitting in a car? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters in this conversation. And if this story moved you, if you believe in holding power accountable, please like and subscribe. We will see you in the next one. Stay safe and stay awake.
Drop the tool and step away from the vehicle, now!
Officer, this is my car. I'm not a suspect. I'm the owner.
I said don't talk! Turn around or you will be tased!
You're making a serious mistake. I am compliant. Check the plate.
Hands up now!
I'm compliant. Look, keep out in his hand.
Officer Kyle Braden had been patrolling the streets of Charleston, South Carolina for 6 years when he made a decision that would not only end his career but would cost the city's taxpayers a staggering $6.4 million. He was 29 years old, a man who wore his badge with a swagger that suggested he believed his authority was absolute. He had come to view the citizens of his district not as a community to be served, but as a collection of potential threats to be neutralized. On a bright, cloudless Saturday morning in May, Braden received a dispatch call regarding a suspicious individual at a self-service car wash. The subject was described as a black male potentially stripping parts from a high-end vehicle. The subject was in fact Colonel Marcus Thorne, a 54-year-old retired Marine Corps officer and a recipient of the Silver Star, who was lovingly polishing the chrome on his own car. What Braden did next, bypassing protocol, ignoring reason and assaulting a decorated veteran in broad daylight, would become a definitive case study in how unchecked bias and arrogance can dismantle a police department's reputation in a matter of minutes. Before we dive into the details of this infuriating case, take a moment to let us know in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe that those who enforce the law must be held to the highest standard of the law, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We are committed to bringing you the stories that the mainstream media often overlooks, and your support is what keeps this channel alive. The incident occurred at the Suds and Shine Auto Spa on Savannah Highway. It is the sort of establishment that caters to car enthusiasts, the weekend warriors who prefer to wash their vehicles by hand rather than trust them to the scratching brushes of an automatic tunnel. It was 10:30 a.m. The sun was high, reflecting off the wet pavement. The bays were full of people spraying down SUVs and sedans, the air filled with the smell of soap and tire shine. It was a peaceful, mundane scene of American life. But Officer Braden didn't see peace. When the call came in his mind, immediately painted a picture of criminality. He didn't hear man washing car. He heard perpetrator. He didn't consider that a black man in a mechanic's jumpsuit might be a hobbyist working on his own property. He assumed with the fatal confidence of the prejudiced that he was heading toward a felony in progress. He turned on his siren not for safety but for intimidation and pressed his foot heavy onto the accelerator. He was looking for a fight. He had no idea that the man he was rushing to confront had survived combat zones that would have made Braden's toughest patrol shift look like a kindergarten recess. Braden was about to learn a very expensive lesson about respect assumption and the Constitution. To understand the magnitude of the mistake Officer Braden was about to make, you have to understand the man he was targeting. Colonel Marcus Thorne had spent 30 years in the United States Marine Corps. He had led battalions in Fallujah and Helmand Province. He had organized logistics for humanitarian missions in the Pacific. He was a man who lived by a code of honor, courage, and commitment. He had retired 2 years ago with a full pension and a chest full of medals, including the Silver Star for gallantry in action. At 54, Thorne was physically imposing, 6'2", broad-shouldered, with the kind of posture that comes from 3 decades of standing at attention. He kept his hair high and tight, his face clean-shaven, and his demeanor calm. Thorne's pride and joy was parked in Bay No. 3, a pristine raven black 1967 Shelby GT500. This wasn't just a car. It was a piece of history that Thorne had spent the last 5 years restoring with his own hands. He knew every bolt, every gasket, and every stitch of the leather interior. He had bought it as a wreck and brought it back to life, a project that had helped him transition from the chaos of war to the quiet of civilian life. That Saturday morning, Thorne was wearing a gray mechanic's coverall with his name embroidered on the chest pocket, a habit from his service days where organization and identification were paramount. He had the hood of the Shelby popped open. He wasn't stripping the car. He was detailing the engine block using a toothbrush and a specialized degreaser to ensure the Cobra Le Mans valve covers were spotless for a car show scheduled for the following afternoon. He moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Wipe, inspect, polish. He was in his element, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the satisfaction of honest work. The Suds and Shine was relatively busy, but Bay 3 offered a bit of seclusion at the end of the row. Thorne preferred it that way. He didn't want overspray from other cars hitting his fresh wax job. He had his supplies neatly organized on a rolling cart he'd brought with him. Microfiber towels, folded in quarters, labeled spray bottles, a socket wrench set, just in case he needed to tighten a hose clamp. He was the picture of a responsible, meticulous car owner. To anyone with a modicum of common sense, he looked exactly like what he was, a man who loved his car. But common sense is not always common, and perception is often clouded by a filter of deep-seated bias. While Thorne worked, he was being watched, and the eyes watching him did not see a veteran enjoying his retirement. They saw a threat. Todd Miller was 38 years old and had been the manager of Suds and Shine for 4 years. He spent most of his shifts inside the air-conditioned glass office that overlooked the wash bays, scrolling through his phone and occasionally shouting at teenagers to turn down their music. Miller considered himself the guardian of the establishment, a man who could spot trouble from a mile away. In reality, Miller was a man possessed by a nervous, unfounded suspicion of anyone who didn't fit his narrow definition of a typical customer. From his vantage point in the office, Miller had been fixated on Bay 3 for 20 minutes. He saw a black man in coveralls leaning over the engine of a car that Miller knew was worth upwards of $200,000. In Miller's mind, the equation didn't balance. He reasoned that people who owned cars like that didn't wash them themselves. They paid detailers. He reasoned that people who owned cars like that didn't wear mechanics' jumpsuits. He ignored the fact that Thorne had arrived in the car driving it into the bay. Miller had been in the bathroom when Thorne pulled in, so he hadn't seen the arrival. He only saw the current scene, a black man with tools under the hood of a Shelby. "He's stripping it," Miller muttered to himself, pacing the small office. "He's taking the engine parts right here in the bay." It was a ludicrous assumption. Who would steal engine parts in broad daylight at a busy car wash with cameras everywhere? But bias does not require logic to thrive. It only requires an opportunity to manifest. Miller watched for another 5 minutes, his heart rate climbing. He convinced himself that he was witnessing a grand theft auto ring in action. He picked up the phone and dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? Yeah, I need police at Suds and Shine on Savannah Highway. Miller said, his voice trembling with self-importance. I've got a suspicious character here. He's dismantling a classic car in one of my bays. I think he's stealing parts. The dispatcher asked for clarification. Is he acting aggressively? Has he threatened anyone? No, but he's got tools, Miller said, embellishing the narrative. He's got wrenches and he's tearing the engine apart. It's a Shelby GT 500. There's no way it belongs to him. He looks like he doesn't belong here. Does he belong here? That is the question that lies at the heart of so many of these encounters. Miller had decided based on nothing but skin color and clothing that Colonel Thorne was an intruder in a space where he was actually a paying customer. The dispatcher logged the call as a suspicious person, potential theft in progress. That was the information beamed to Officer Kyle Braden's patrol computer, and that was the spark that would ignite the powder keg. Officer Kyle Braden was already in a foul mood when the call came in. But more concerning than his mood was his record. In his 6 years with the Charleston Police Department, Braden had accumulated 9 internal affairs complaints. For a patrol officer, that number was astronomical. 4 of them were for excessive force. 5 were for discourtesy or biased policing. There was a pattern to Braden's conduct that should have been obvious to anyone in the chain of command. He targeted minority citizens in affluent areas. 2 years prior, he had detained a black real estate agent who was showing a home in the historic district, insisting she was a squatter until her white clients arrived to vouch for her. That complaint was sustained, resulting in a written reprimand and a one-day suspension. Another incident involved him tackling a Hispanic delivery driver, who he claimed looked like he was fleeing when the man was simply jogging back to his truck. Despite these red flags, Braden remained on the street. His union representative was skilled at arguing that Braden was simply proactive and tough on crime. His supervisors, overworked and understaffed, often looked the other way, prioritizing arrest statistics over community relations. They noted in his file that he needed to work on his interpersonal communication, a euphemism that grossly understated the danger he posed to the public. Braden had learned that he could push the envelope, that he could escalate situations, and that the department would ultimately protect him. He felt untouchable. So when Braden saw the dispatch details, black male stripping vehicle suds and shine, his confirmation bias kicked into overdrive. He didn't think to ask questions. He didn't consider observing the situation first. He viewed himself as the thin blue line between order and chaos, and he was determined to make an arrest. He sped down Savannah Highway, weaving through traffic, adrenaline pumping through his veins. He wasn't going to investigate. He was going to conquer. He pulled into the car wash lot at 10:42 a.m., tires screeching slightly as he braked. He spotted the Shelby in Bay 3 immediately. He saw the man in the gray jumpsuit, and in that moment, Braden decided the outcome of the encounter before he had even opened his car door. Colonel Thorne heard the siren cut off abruptly, followed by the crunch of tires on gravel. He didn't look up immediately. He was focused on a stubborn spot of grease on the intake manifold. He assumed the police were there for a traffic stop on the main road, or perhaps a fender bender in the lot. It wasn't until he saw the shadow fall over his engine bay that he realized the attention was directed at him. Thorne straightened up, holding a microfiber cloth in his left hand and a small 10mm wrench in his right. He turned to see a young police officer, Officer Braden, standing 10 feet away, hand hovering near his holster stance, wide and aggressive. "Step away from the vehicle," Braden shouted, his voice cracking with intensity. "Drop the tools and step away from the vehicle now." Thorne blinked, his expression remaining calm. He had faced insurgents armed with RPGs. A shouting 29-year-old with a badge did not induce panic. He slowly lowered the wrench to the rolling cart, keeping his movements deliberate to avoid startling the officer. "Officer," Thorne said, his voice a deep baritone, steady and controlled. "I am the owner of this vehicle. I'm just detailing the engine." "I said step away." Braden stepped closer, invading Thorne's personal space. "I'm not going to ask you again. Get back against the wall." "There is no need for shouting," Thorne said, not moving back. He stood his ground, not out of defiance, but out of dignity. "If you lower your voice, we can resolve this. My registration is in the glove box. My ID is in my back pocket." "Do not reach for anything," Braden screamed. He was escalating, feeding off his own manufactured tension. He saw Thorne's size and his calm demeanor not as compliance, but as a threat. In Braden's mind, a suspect should be nervous, cowering. Thorne's composure felt like a challenge to his authority. "You are detained for investigation of grand larceny. Put your hands where I can see them." "Grand larceny?" Thorne frowned, a flash of irritation finally crossing his face. "Son, I restored this car. I have the title at home and the registration right here. If you just take a breath." "I am not your son," Braden snapped. "Turn around now." The other customers in the car wash had stopped what they were doing. The sprayers went silent. People were watching. Phones were coming out. A woman in the next bay shouted, "He's just washing his car. He's been here for an hour." Braden ignored the witness. He was tunnel-visioned. He closed the distance, grabbing Thorne's arm to spin him around. Thorne didn't flinch, his muscles rigid. "Officer, you are making a mistake," Thorne warned, his voice dropping an octave. "I am a colonel in the United States Marine Corps. You need to unhand me." I don't care if you're the president, Braden spat. You're under arrest. The physical contact was the tipping point. Braden, realizing he couldn't easily manhandle a man of Thorne's stature, panicked. He let go of Thorne's arm and immediately drew his taser. The bright yellow weapon was leveled at Thorne's chest. Get on the ground, Braden yelled. Get on the ground or you're gonna ride the lightning. Thorne looked at the taser, then at Braden's eyes. He saw the fear and the aggression there. He knew that any sudden movement would result in him being tased. Slowly, with immense dignity, Thorne turned toward his beloved car. He placed his hands on the roof, careful not to scratch the paint he had just polished. I am complying, Thorne said loudly for the benefit of the cameras now recording him. I am not resisting. This officer is using excessive force. Braden holstered the taser and grabbed Thorne's wrist again, twisting it behind his back with unnecessary force. He shoved Thorne forward. Thorne's hip collided with the front fender of the Shelby. The metal buckled slightly under the impact, a dent in the pristine bodywork. Thorne winced not from pain, but from the sound of his hard work being damaged. You dented my car, Thorne said through gritted teeth. Stop resisting. Braden shouted the universal cry of an officer trying to justify rough handling. He slapped the handcuffs on Thorne's wrists, tightening them until they bit into the skin. He kicked Thorne's legs apart, patting him down aggressively. Stolen valor, huh? Braden sneered, finding the wallet in Thorne's pocket but not opening it yet. Claiming you're a colonel. You know that's a federal crime, impersonating an officer. You're going away for a long time, buddy. Stealing a Shelby and lying about your service. The crowd was getting louder. He's telling the truth, a man in a baseball cap yelled. We saw him drive it in. Back off, Braden shouted at the crowd. Or you're next for obstruction. Braden keyed his radio. Dispatch 1 in custody. Suspect is non-compliant and hostile. Send backup. Thorne stood handcuffed against his car, his head high. He didn't struggle. He didn't scream. He waited. He knew the system. He knew that Braden had just dug a hole so deep that he would never climb out of it. Thorne began to memorize the badge number, the time, the procedure violations. He wasn't just a victim. He was a tactician, and he was gathering intelligence for the battle that would come in the courtroom. The backup arrived 3 minutes later. It was Sergeant Reynolds, a shift supervisor with 25 years on the force. Reynolds was 55 years old, a man who had seen it all and had little patience for rookie mistakes. He saw the scene immediately. The crowd recording the beautiful car, the man in the mechanic's jumpsuit handcuffed, and Braden looking frantic and sweaty. Reynolds walked up, his eyes scanning everything. He looked at Thorne. He saw the haircut. He saw the bearing. He saw the Thorne embroidered on the coveralls. Braden, what do we have? Reynolds asked, his voice calm. Caught him stripping the engine, Braden said breathlessly. Tried to resist. Claimed it was his. Claimed he was a Marine colonel. Reynolds looked at the car. The hood was up. Detailing supplies were laid out neatly. This didn't look like a chop shop operation. This looked like a spa day for a car. Reynolds walked over to the rolling cart. He saw the expensive waxes, the microfiber towels. Did you run the plates? Reynolds asked. Not yet. I detained him for safety first, Braden said defensively. Reynolds sighed. He walked to the back of the Shelby and called in the tag number on his portable radio. Dispatch run tag Sierra Tango 559. The radio crackled back instantly. Tag returns to a 1967 Shelby. Registered owner Marcus Thorne. Status valid. No warrants. Reynolds closed his eyes for a second. He felt a pit in his stomach. He looked at the man in handcuffs. Sir, Reynolds said to Thorne. What is your name? Colonel Marcus Thorne, USMC, retired. Thorne replied clearly. My military ID is in my wallet, which Officer Braden currently has in his pocket. Reynolds turned to Braden. Give me the wallet. Braden hesitated, his face losing color. Sarge, he was, give me the wallet. Braden handed it over. Reynolds opened it. There it was, the Department of Defense identification, the retired officer card, and the driver's license matching the registration. Reynolds looked at Braden with a mix of disbelief and fury. "You arrested the registered owner of the vehicle. You have a colonel in handcuffs for washing his own car." The manager said," Braden stammered. "I don't care what the manager said," Reynolds snapped. "You verify. That is day one stuff." Reynolds walked behind Thorne and unlocked the handcuffs. "Colonel, I am removing these restraints. On behalf of the Charleston Police Department, I apologize. This is a severe misunderstanding." Thorne rubbed his wrists. He turned slowly to face Braden. He didn't yell. He spoke with the cold, hard precision of a commanding officer addressing a subordinate who had failed completely. "Officer Braden," Thorne said, "you refused to look at my identification. You refused to listen. You damaged my property. You assaulted a federal officer. You have disgraced your uniform. I served this country for 30 years to protect the rights you just trampled on. You are not fit to wear that badge." Braden stood there silent, the realization of his catastrophe crashing down on him. The cameras were still rolling. The crowd was silent now, listening to the dress down. The body camera footage was released 4 days later. It did not take long to circulate. The image of a young, arrogant officer manhandling a calm, decorated black veteran became the lead story on every major news network. The hashtag #HatchColonelThorne trended for a week. The fallout was swift and absolute. The Charleston Police Department, faced with undeniable video evidence and a public relations nightmare, moved quickly. Officer Kyle Braden was placed on administrative leave, and following a swift internal investigation, his employment was terminated. But it didn't end there. The review board found his actions so egregious that they petitioned the South Carolina Criminal Justice Academy to decertify him. Braden's name was added to the National Registry, ensuring he would never work in law enforcement again. Todd Miller, the manager of Suds & Shine, was fired by the corporate ownership of the car wash chain. The company issued a public apology and donated $50,000 to a veterans charity, but the damage to their local reputation was permanent. Locals boycotted the location for months. Colonel Thorne sued the city and the police department for false arrest, excessive force, and civil rights violations. His legal team argued that the department had been negligent in retaining Braden despite his pattern of behavior. The city attorneys looked at the 9 prior complaints, looked at the video of Braden denting the Shelby, and realized they had no defense. They settled for $6.4 million, one of the largest payouts in the city's history. But as Colonel Thorne stood on the steps of the courthouse after the settlement was announced, he didn't look triumphant. He looked tired. He spoke to the press, his voice somber. "I don't want the money," Thorne said. "I want to be able to wash my car on a Saturday morning without fearing for my life. I wore the uniform of this country. I bled for this country. And yet, in my own neighborhood, I am still seen as a suspect first and a citizen second. That is the wound that money cannot heal." Thorne's words linger because they strike at the uncomfortable truth of our society. It asks us to consider the price of bias, not just the $6.4 million paid by taxpayers, but the human cost of dignity stripped away. It reminds us that for some, the war doesn't end when they take off the camouflage. It continues on the streets of the cities they swore to defend. What do you think? Should police officers lose qualified immunity when they bypass standard procedures like verifying ID? And should people who make racially motivated 911 calls face criminal charges for filing false reports? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, if you believe in accountability and justice, please hit that like button and subscribe. It helps us continue to shine a light on the truth. Thank you for watching, and stay safe out there.